Right now, Shasta College has a small grant to network and connect with various organizations and entities that are working on forest and community resilience projects around wildfire, specifically a lot of kind of fuels treatments, various fuels treatment projects, of which there's a lot going on, and then to facilitate the use of GIS and the sort of um, ramping up of the skills that the workforce needs to be able to effectively use GIS in light of the fact that there are a variety of different applications and platforms and protocols and things that are coming down the pike, not to mention different data sets that are available. And part of this has been like right now in terms of product, we're working on a story map that will identify some of these various initiatives and efforts that are going on from the state level down to kind of regional initiatives and local things that are happening with the resource conservation districts, for example. So as you probably know, our GIS certificate is a little bit not specific to a particular theme, although we've always had more of an orientation towards sort of natural resource management and forest management in sort of the typical applications, although we'll certainly have students that'll go to work in, Caltrans or local government, there's a lot of that. But we did recently write a non-credit course for forest resilience project management using GIS.
Organizations, individuals, stakeholders, what initiatives are in existence, what sort of, top-down government directives or policies are in place, and just trying to, keep a sense of the purpose and need and objectives through that. But I could probably just sort of, I think an important thing to identify is just like, where is the authoritative direction coming from? And to my mind, that's mostly going to be federal or state.
Yeah,
That's, and just seeing what's already established, what's coming down the pipe, who, there's organizations that are, very highbrow, very skilled teams who are stating that they're working to handle a lot of these problems, and at the very least making sure that work at the county level or the prescribed burn association level is aware of those higher level organizations that are doing coordination. But it's tough. I mean, it's just like you just do a Google search and start going down the rabbit hole, and then you come across something in like a Cal Fire article somewhere that's like, we're working with this organization for our new like real-time wildfire modeling software. I'm like, what is that?
right. Yeah.
and
Yeah. And I've been working in the field for decades, and how come I've never heard of it?
right, I don't say it in the negative sense, but revolving door of like, 501(c)(3) to academia to government,
Yeah.
meant like a lot of those names, like well published names, show up in organizations like this, and they do a lot of cool kind of cutting edge modeling work and cool decision support work. But then you go to some of these pages and you can kind of tell it's like, you know there's a lot of dead links and they're real heavy on their verbiage. But it's like, okay, so you did this big project like modifying all the land fire data for California, and I read through your summary, and now I click the FTP link and it's nowhere to be found, and I can't I can't find it through any Google search, and there's just endemic issue. So I am in the College of Natural Resources, Forestry, Watershed, and Wildland Sciences department, working on a master's degree. So it'll effectively look like a forestry master's on paper, with my focus being through the Cal Poly Humboldt Wildland Fire Lab, focusing on fire ecology. Um, so it's in short, the Humboldt Fire Lab.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Um, so if you're okay with it, maybe I could just take a couple minutes and kind of, sort of set the stage here a little bit.
Definitely.
And I'm going to go ahead and share screen. Actually, the first window up here is the Pyrologics, just because I hadn't heard of them, so I just Googled it. But I think a lot of the efforts that are happening right now are happening around the California Wildfire Resilience Task Force. And, these regional resource kits are particularly interesting to look at, especially if you look at the resource kit, for example, for our region. And those regional profiles themselves are interesting. They're kind of like the, 3 or 4 page narrative. But within this, and they talk all about, metrics and how they did this, and you can download data, and within here, and you can see how they've got this structured around these different pillars. And if you choose one of their pillars, you'll get some of their data set, and then you can bring up an individual map. This is all 30-meter resolution data. And so this has been a big part of the state's efforts. And then part of this includes Planscape, which is this decision-making tool, which is an interactive map where you can go in and sort of identify different treatments. So you can see, you can just kind of launch the tool from here, and you'll go in and it's just sort of an application that they've built, and there's a variety of YouTube videos and things that you can look at in terms of how this thing works. So that's kind of at this broad statewide level. One of the things that the California State Department of Conservation is hosting is these regional forest and fire capacity program grants. And if you look at this, you'll see that, this is a great example of the sort of jurisdictional boundary issue, where you end up with the North Coast Resource Partnership having this tongue that extends, practically into Modoc County. And then this odd cut of Shasta County, you can see the sort of western border of Shasta County, which is partly the result of the fact that the Western Shasta RCD is a principal on this effort, which is the Northern Sacramento Valley Coalition. And you can see that, that there are $8 million that have been allocated for this effort, which currently includes an effort to produce a community wildfire protection plan. And here is the example Sonoma County Wildfire Protection Plan on a hub site. So one of the things that there's some discussion about doing is to actually kind of use this as a model for the kind of thing that we might try to do here in Shasta County. And it's, they've got all these different planning tools and whatnot. Needless to say, Sonoma County has, probably resources at its disposal that isn't necessarily what we might have in the North State. But suffice to say that's something that is kind of potentially a model. Joe, I know you're familiar with CalMapper. And so this is hosted by the California, by CAL FIRE. And basically this is consuming and displaying fire treatment efforts around. And I'm just going to jump to this one here north of Shasta College, which has recently been undertaken. And I've been out here, and you can see this is an active status project with a couple hundred acres of treatment. And of course, this gets at that sticky issue of, kind of data schemas and standardization of data that's presented and what have you. Just kind of keep running through a few things here. This is the wildland Wildfire and Landscape Resilience Data Hub from UC Davis. And you can see that they link to the regional resource kits that we just looked at a few minutes ago, and then some interagency treatment data, and then a data catalog. And then kind of, well, let me bring this one up first. So we've been in contact with these folks. There is a organization that's been around for 25 years called 34 North that does some really interesting work, and they put together this open NRM platform, and you can see this sort of collaborative open system approach that they're taking. And they've built this outside of the ArcGIS world in Postgres. And I have a login to this particular site, and this is the one that they did for the Bernie Hat Creek area, and they're interested in expanding this west into Shasta County. And you can see they're pitching fuels reduction, forest restoration, tracking projects, and then they've got really quite a fairly impressive suite of data and tools available where if I'm doing a particular project, I could come in here and define a project area. And once I've done that, then I could come through and start looking through this really rich catalog of data that they provide access to. I can add those in as a feature layer or a map service. And then you can see that there's a bunch of kind of analysis tools that they've embedded in this, adding different kinds of treatments. There's some kind of overlay analysis stuff that you can do with GIS tools and whatnot. So they've, this goes on and on and on. This is basically data that they're hosting. And so part of what, in talking with them, sounds like, they're very much interested in, what is the data that Shasta County has going on, which brings me to the last, I'm kind of going from kind of the state scale down to
Right.
the local efforts. And this is the Shasta County Fire Safe Council web platform that one of our graduates was involved in putting together. And this is something of a data dump. And so it's, kind of ugly in terms of, the way some of this data presents. But you can see kind of how it's organized and yeah, this very much fits in with what you were saying about sort of the collaboration, the collaborative idea.
Right. So, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind from a collaboration standpoint is I feel like it'd be good to know from whoever's developing and hosting some of these platforms, like what the usage is that they're seeing.
Yes.
And my suspicion would be that most of these tools are underutilized. I don't know how you would necessarily, assess that objectively, but I think there could be just seeing some numbers of visitation and usage could be good. And then, next level would be identifying, how, assuming they're potentially effective tools that you'd like to promote, like what's the outreach need to get folks using them, or secondarily, maybe it's that folks are aware and they're just, the tools aren't serving them in the way they're intended to, because often those of us sitting behind the screen might not be thinking about some of the potential use cases out there and limitations. So that's kind of just the first comment on just sort of like there's this suite of resources, and we don't really know even how actively they're being used. We know that they're handy. I know that just as a concerned citizen, I like being able to see where projects are going on, particularly if there was any sort of environmental compliance going into it. I feel like it would probably be good for you all to at least familiarize yourself with the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy, federal document that came out in 2014 that really clearly identified this need for an all hands, all lands approach to wildland fire management. And I think if you're not already familiar, it'd be something good to brush up on. I can't claim to have fully digested the 100 whatever page document, but at least I'd say having a good idea of the overview and executive summary would be good, because a lot of this work at any level does kind of fall under the umbrella of that intention that was set by that document, whether there's actually a policy directive behind the work or not.
So is that going to be things that affect federal lands exclusively?
So, in terms of policy, it's meant to affect federal lands, but it's essentially the policy document stating that if we're going to manage fire effectively, we can't we can't do so strictly with respect to ownership boundaries.
Yes. That's kind of the pod idea too, right?
Totally. Yeah. And so a lot of this stuff that's being implemented at the federal level is with this in mind. And I think, too often for sometimes, well understood reasons, these higher level organizations get siloed off from one another through some of those tools a little bit to planscape. So my understanding, just, based on reading the documentation, is that it's essentially an overlay analysis that's being conducted with authoritative data sets. And if you have, let's say you identify your Ross Pond project area and you identify objectives through those pillars. So the pillars are like your objective themes. And then under those themes, there's, all these various data sets that may or may not have pretty high level analysis behind them, like definitely the fire dynamics stuff that's coming from Pyrologics and does include some pretty high level analysis.
Open NRM, because I think that their analysis tools, you talked about the WUI and you can see all the sort of WUI related, wildland urban interface related layers that they bring into their tools. And then, they do have, some degree of analytical tools. These are actually kind of interesting things where you can come in and say, like, if I'm interested in, the biodiversity of this area, then I can come in and, that wanted a feature. So I could grab that feature and it's going to crunch out. Well, it looks like it's giving me spotted owl habitat, which of course is obviously not a place that you would expect to find things, but it is interesting that the way they've built the tools out. And as you said, I think a great thing to do would be to really see, an organization that has really put this thing to the test for an applied
Yeah. And
project.
also, just as you're going in this tool, I'm just noting redundancy between this and Planscape. And since this isn't set up for us to identify where this data is hosted, I don't know that we can see if it's actually just the same source data or not. Like,
Yeah, they do a pretty good job with kind of fleshing out the metadata. So you can get at some of that, but again, I think it does raise the question. And I know this, this effort, I think a lot of this effort actually has come down through the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, which is another just thing that organization that is there's a lot more in here for Sierra Nevada Brewery than there is the Conservancy. But this has become a primary arm of statewide distribution. You can see that this is now has a GOV. I don't think it started as a government arm, but well, here you see SNC awards $27 million. So obviously, so back to the reason I went down this rabbit hole. So this is an SNC funded effort.
And I think if you go to the FS Geodata one below, that there's
Yeah, that sounds like
and
There's
find
probably
the
overlap with the national map, huh?
there might be, yeah. So I know that you can point directly to just the hosted data, or you can download, like a nationwide or local database.
Use case. I think a major part of this is going to be, and this really gets at the collaborative thing, is for Shasta, let's just say the Shasta County Fire Safe Council, for them to be able to come in and demonstrate that not only is there an understanding of where other treatments have taken place, but there is an informed analysis of the different factors that would make the case for putting money on the ground into project treatment work, right? That's really kind of where, and ultimately, doing so positions the county to being able to be competitive for grant funds, for example, to say, hey, we've really got things together here. Look at, we've created this continuous fuel break. Here's a known vulnerability that we have based on looking at all this information, and we're going to run down some grant dollars to be able to do that work.
Okay, so these you recognize the checkerboard, I know, and
Let's see. It says oh, there we go. Okay, I knew we were going to get a lag. There it is. Yep. Oh, the lovely checkerboard.
what could have possibly been done just in these checkerboards? And okay, so they're going to call this the car fire, and I can almost guarantee these were salvage logging. And so, just to sort of point out the span of potential treatments, and I'm not going to put on my tree hugger hat and harp against salvage logging, but I think you and I both know that the the effectiveness in salvage logging in terms of fuels reduction and restoration is contested. You look over kind of on the north end of Shasta Lake, these are probably some of the recent prescribed burns. So yeah, so underburn, backbone, that was last April. And zoom even further out and we start seeing some of these wildfires. And it gets tough to figure out, exactly what methods have been filtered out or filtered in for some of these treatments. So I'm just pointing out some of these things by way of expressing that, there's, obviously it's not a binary treated or not, or good or bad. There's varying degrees of treatment level.
So I just switched to the imagery in this area. So there's the checkerboard. So to my read, and by the way, the checkerboard and the imagery is off, just
Yeah,
another story. But anyway, to my read of this looks like SPI land, which
right.
looks much more actively managed. This looks to be the Forest Service land. So it looks to me like, and again, presumably, and I don't know if we can even derive this information, but presumably we're looking at imagery that's post car fire. So, this looks to me for all the world like there's been like a lot of work happening in this area on the
Yeah.
private side, but that's
So
not even reflected in the data set.
yeah, so yeah, we could probably burrow into that and be like, what's going on? Just kind of the Ross Ranch area, and maybe bring the screen back.
Yeah, you can grab share screen again.
Okay. So if you can see what I'm seeing, we
Yep.
know the area well. Wonder if I can bring up my lab report real quick. So this was just some work I did for a lab for my fire modeling class. Um, by no means has it been scrutinized at a high level, but for reference, assuming it'll load. So looking in the lower right here, this is burn probability with simulated human ignitions for a weather scenario with wind out of the south. And, in the bottom right of my analysis area, that's generally, Bella Vista, Shasta College, East Reading zone. And it lights up so brightly because there's such a higher probability of human ignitions in that area, but also, continuity of fuels. If you think about the more, grass, shrub, oak, woodland, gray pine vegetation community, you can imagine it'll carry fire pretty well. So then if we look back at this fire safe council map, that's a big blank zone on the map. So it would make sense that that would be an area, assuming you had scrutinized your burn probability analysis fully, this would be an area that you'd want to hone in on. It's obviously close to our hearts because it's close to our homes. And, at this point, you might start looking at this area going, well, where could we implement a treatment? And obviously there's a lot that comes into play: land ownership, fuel type, watershed, resource concerns. So just sort of looking at all that, I'd say that Planscape would probably be a good place to start. And if we were an organization that, had the funding and the authority to start looking into planning this kind of work, you could probably go to Planscape, say, have your objectives prepared, see where they fit in with those pillars, run your little landscape analysis, and I'd imagine it would come up with some areas that would, be priority treatment zones based on those objectives. The one shortcoming I'm seeing with Planscape is it doesn't really incorporate, let's call it the contagion effect of fire. So if you want to benefit wildlife habitat, improve watershed conditions, reduce the probability of high severity fire in the WUI, those are all essentially like point location values. You're not going to consider where might you treat outside of the WUI, or where might you treat outside of your spotted owl habitat to reduce the probability of a fire impacting the WUI. And that's where, some of the higher level landscape planning tools come into play, because they'll actually model fire spread through an area. And it's a problem that I've tried to kind of wrap my head around, a spatial problem I've tried to wrap my head around since I started working in resource management, and particular in invasive plants, because they spread. So, conditions at a specific location aren't the only thing dictating presence or absence, or occurrence of a fire. So by way of, muddying the waters with some of those caveats, I'll just open FlamMap and just sort of give you a very quick overview of what this interface looks like. Might bring you back to ArcView just in its feel, and it's a software that's been around for, I think, since the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and has seen quite a few modifications in its underlying code, but I don't think has seen many modifications in its interface. There's a fair number of things that feel pretty clunky, especially by comparison to new software like ArcGIS Pro. But what's working in the background here is essentially raster data as an input for your fire spread equation parameters, and essentially any process in here would start with downloading a landscape file from Landfire. So if you just think back to your fire safe council map viewer, let's say in Planscape we've identified a zone north of Ross Ranch that looks like it stands out needing treatment. Maybe from there we're going to hone in on doing some simulations in FlamMap to see what changing those fuel conditions could do for modeled fire behavior. There's a number of tools that can be run in FlamMap, and it would take another several hours to give you full background on those, and I'm not even fully qualified to give you full background on those, but I'm actively learning about them now. So a basic flam map run is going to just calculate potential fire behavior at a pixel by pixel level. So there's no effect from adjacent pixels. If you had one pixel that had a high probability of producing very high flame lengths and another that didn't, there's no effect of the heat from that adjacent pixel influencing its neighboring pixel. That'll basically give you an output that looks like, let's see.
Joe, where are we looking here?
Uh, this is the Butler fire footprint, sort of like Sawyer's Bar area.
Okay.
And I just brought up a recent project because it was something I had active. Um, so, this very unimpressive color gradient. Let's see, here's a better one. So this is rate of spread. And if you did a flam map run, just every one of these pixels would get a value that was within your study area. It's not assessing the spread of fire from a point and seeing how it would move through that area. It's just looking at what would occur given fuel conditions in that location. And then sort of the next level up of complexity in modeling is minimum travel time, which is fire spread, but it's fire spread under fixed weather conditions. And so that is going to calculate your pixel to pixel. It's a little more complicated than pixel to pixel, but effectively pixel to pixel fire behavior. And it'll give you, a perimeter given a certain amount of simulation time.
Joe, you mentioned the, based on existing fuel loads. So what's the basis of the fuel load determination? I mean,
yeah, I'll backtrack a bit here. You love these color maps, right? So this is the land fire output fire behavior fuel models. And there's a publication from 2005 that are the standard 40 fire behavior fuel models. So nationwide, we've got 40 classes for fuels. And those classes have set parameters for surface fuels. And so that would be like, loading is mass per unit area, and it's going to have that by fuel component. So you're from your small twigs up to your large logs, herbaceous fuels, live woody fuels. And then separately from that, there's canopy data, because canopy fire and surface fire are modeled separately. They're linked, like it requires a certain amount of surface fire intensity to initiate crown fire, but they're essentially separate models. So the data that, if I don't know how well the resolution's coming through, but under the analysis area over here, this is my landscape file that I downloaded from Landfire, and everyone is going to come with elevation, slope, aspect, fuel model, canopy cover, stand height.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And canopy.
Back up a second here. So you're downloading. So flam map, no E,
Yeah.
is the application that you're running, and you download it and install it on the system that you're working on, and then
Yeah.
is it Landfire? Is that the source of the data that you?
Yeah, so Landfire is the standardized source for spatial fuels data in the United States. And like Pyrologics, this is the example I brought up earlier of like dead links. Pyrologics did work where they customized the California land fire fuel models in a way that was, more refined, because land fire happens at a national level, and there's these sort of mapping boundaries where your thresholds of how you classify based on the imagery will cut off, and you'll just have these sort of arbitrary boundaries where your classifications differ, et cetera. the inputs are fairly simple. You input initial fuel moisture, and then it'll condition the fuel moisture for a set period of time based on weather data that you input. And you could imagine, not every 3-inch diameter log on the landscape is going to have the same percent moisture content at the same time. North aspects are going to change, south aspects are different. So it goes through that fuel moisture conditioning, the interagency fuels treatment decision support system, and it's essentially FlamMap, but it's web hosted, and it's a bit less capable, but it's a more user friendly interface. But it's effectively functioning on all the same. So in Planscape, they've got their documentation and a user guide, and see if I can find where basically you get to the end, and they sort of, which I love from any good organization or research group, they state the limitations of their product. Essentially, you get to the end of their documentation. It's like you've done all this work. Just remember that they've set thresholds, and they're somewhat arbitrary, and that this is just a part of the planning process in which you would often then take these polygons offline and do more work. And I assume what they're meaning by offline is now send it to your fire behavior specialist, and they'll run some models based on your priority areas.
I mean, one of the things, Joe, that occurs to me just in kind of thinking about this, I mean, I find myself thinking that, we've got a lot of technical and resource capabilities in consulting firms, long-time consulting firms in the area, and that some kind of a workflow that might involve using Planscape to do sort of a first level, here's a drainage, here's an area that we think we want to do some work, and then, maybe, farming out the fire behavior stuff to,
right.
Somebody that has the time and energy to figure out how to really use the models, know that they're using them correctly.
Totally. Yeah, so I'm having fun learning a lot of this stuff, and I've been a little surprised. I mean, I guess I should stop being surprised because it's a recurring experience I have. I find myself surprised how underutilized some of these resources seem to be, just anecdotally when I talk with folks who are, fairly high up in, agencies or consulting groups, who are just either not aware of the tools or like, yeah, no, nobody's using those. And I don't think that's universal. It's just my sample size is very small. But, I think maybe this is just human factors in planning and democracy and land management. Is you can have specialists develop, refined tools that have specific use cases, and still we rely on people to know the tools exist and utilize them. So yeah, I think it seems like the work that you have planned, there could be a lot of potential for just sort of like doing a deep dive, not necessarily a deep dive, but just gaining some breadth in understanding what tools are out there and querying the community of practice to see how well utilized the tools really are. And then maybe from there, you'd be able to make some recommendations on, where people could maybe put some more effort into learning how to use some of these resources.
Yeah, it kind of it makes me think that, looking at something like the work that's being done in Santa Rosa, for example, if there's a sense of like, wow, this Sonoma County really has things on the ball, then maybe reaching out and seeing if we can get some insights and get some feedback from them on the approach they took and the models they used and which ones were
Right,
most effective.
right. So you had mentioned wanting to talk about Chat GPT a little bit. Is that, do you still want to go there? Or-
Oh, yeah, if you've got a few minutes, I'd love
I've
to
got
see.
I kind of set myself up. Tuesdays are my, I don't have any classes, so I try to just be sort of free form. Yeah, I've just got a, nice color gradient up there. So I'd kind of brainstormed about something we could try to do real time with Chat GPT. And I guess a simple case would be just from, with GIS as ArcGIS Pro is the interface here. Um, I'm looking at a raster that's these are days. It's a fire progression, and they're just days of the year values in a raster. So this was day of year 216. And let's just say I know raster calculator exists. I've used it a few times, but I don't know what kind of expression I would need to input in order to, let's say, just produce an output raster with a value of 1 for day 217. And so I'm going to open raster calculator. And I'm kind of just free form here, walking you through a problem that I might encounter that I'm trying to solve. And so I'll just reiterate the you know sort of random problem I'm trying to solve here and see if you have a solution offhand. So when I click this less dark blue, it's day 216. I know that for some part of my analysis, I'm going to need to output that as a value of 1. Maybe want to mask it out of something else. And I just want all other values to be null. And I think I could use the con function to do that, but I'm just not remembering the formula. So I think it's this one. Okay, so I'm going to try to think of how I'm going to formulate this as a question to Chat GPT. Still sharing my screen, aren't I?
Yeah.
So the Chat GPT interface and leaves a bit to be desired. I haven't really dug into any of the other large language models that might be commonly used. I've just kind of opened this one and stuck with it. I do have the subscription version, which gives you access to their like more advanced language model, but the free version is pretty good too. It's sort of formatted as like an infinity chat with different threads. So like in the left-hand pane are all of my chat threads. And this, I was asking it to do something. Basically, I wanted it to help me turn a spreadsheet into a relational database, and it was like, sorry, there's no formula for that. Here's some code. Sometimes I ask a little much out of a spreadsheet. But I'm just going to start with a fresh chat. And it does have memory within a chat stream or a thread, but it doesn't have memory outside of that. So I can't refer within a new conversation to another one. Although the conversations are in theory contributing to the whole model, they're not contributing to my user experience. But you can set up these, they call them GPTs, where you configure with specific instructions on how to handle your queries and how to give you responses. And it will learn how best to respond to you. This is one I set up called GIS Tech, and I just kind of told it like this is my experience level in GIS, and these are the sorts of questions and answers I'm going to pose to you.